not define us. Joy will reignite us. You're the song of our hearts. Come on, my soul. The dark is just a canvas for your grace and brightness. You're the song of our hearts. We're dancing to the rhythm of your heart. Oh, oh, oh. We're rising from the ashes to the stars. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love. You're the joy, the song of my heart, the hope of my soul. Hey! In the shadows, in the sorrows, in the desert, when the pain hits, you are constant, ever present. You're the song of my heart. Oh, in the shadows, in the sorrows, in the desert, when the pain hits, you are constant, ever present. You're the song of my heart. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love, into your arms.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday morning, August the 29th, 2023. We still haven't figured out why the camera does the zoom in thing like this, but hopefully it doesn't feel too close. It's just, but anyway, well, good morning, everybody. And we're going to be looking at just a couple of verses in Philippians chapter 2. And at first glance, I mean, you may think I've entitled it "The Joy of Worship," and that'll come to clear understanding as we get into it. Because when you first read these couple of verses, Paul does talk about my rejoicing and your rejoicing, but at first glance, there's not as clear of a sense of what we deem to be worship, but you'll see. We'll see. So, Philippians chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Therefore, if there's any encouragement in Messiah, if there's any comfort of love, if there's any fellowship of the Spirit of the Ruach, if there's any mercy and compassion, then make my joy complete by being of the same mind, having the same love, united in spirit with one purpose. Do nothing out of selfishness or conceit, but with humility consider others as more important than yourselves, looking out not only for your own interest, but also for the interest of others. Have this mind, this attitude in yourselves, which also was in Messiah Yeshua, who, though being in very nature God, or who existing in the form of God, did not consider equality to God something to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave or a servant, becoming the likeness of men, becoming the same nature as man, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For this reason, God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Yeshua every knee should bow in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, and every tongue profess that Yeshua the Messiah is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Verse 12, therefore, beloved, my loved ones, just as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now even more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And again, we've talked about this, talked about it primarily on Friday, but this is not focused on individual salvation per se, working your salvation, but this is about the overflow of your salvation, working that out, the outworking of salvation relationally in the believing community for the sake of the world. Work that out with fear and trembling, with awe, your salvation. For the one working in you or among you, and it's plural, is God, both to will and to work for his good pleasure, right? He's working, he's energizing you. He's working among you for his good pleasure. So do all things, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you might be blameless and innocent. Unravaged would be the not ravaged, not plundered. You might be blameless and innocent, children of God, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Among them you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that I may boast in the day of Messiah that I did not run or labor in vain, right? So in everything you do, he says, do it without grumbling. In everything you do, do it without grumbling. Do everything without murmuring and arguing. In chapter 1, live out your citizenship worthy of the kingdom of which you are actually a citizen, right? Standing firm in one spirit, striving side by side with one mind, not being alarmed by your opponents, but again in chapter 2, be of the same mind, same love, joined in your soul with one purpose. No selfishness, no pursuit of empty glory, not me first, but rather put others, you before me. Ness is what should characterize us. So that you might be blameless and innocent, children of God in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Right. So here he goes through and he says, among them, I just want to look at verse 16 again, which the beginning of verse 16 really, I feel like if it were me, because, verses were sort of added in later, verse numbers, I feel like it, before the among them is where verse 16 would more clearly start. But among them you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that I may boast in the day of Messiah that I did not run or labor in vain. And you're living out, as you live out the attitude of Messiah, as you live that out, as you demonstrate what people are seeing in you, seeing in me, seeing in us is Messiah. No selfishness, no striving for empty glory. This stark contrast. You're like shining like stars against the backdrop of the universe. You're holding fast and holding out the word of life. And he says, so that I can boast or have confidence in the day of Messiah that I didn't run in vain. I didn't run in emptiness. So you get this word even here again for I didn't run in emptiness. So there's this, we're not to be seeking empty glory, and he's not seeking empty glory, but Messiah emptied himself out. We're to then have that mindset, and the fruit of that is not emptiness, but fullness, right? I didn't empty out so that it would be empty, but that there'd be a fullness of your of you shining forth with in unity and in his light. We looked at the word for boast, because he says that I may boast in the day of Messiah that I didn't run or labor in vain. And we looked at that word for boast in verse 26. Verse 26 of chapter 1, says, so that your confidence, your boast, it's the chachima, your confidence in All right, can you hear? Yeah, they can hear you. All right, sorry. The headphones that we have are, they died, and then it changed the sound settings as soon as they died because they didn't get charged. So in Philippians 1:26, and he's saying, so your confidence, your boast in Messiah Yeshua might overflow because of me coming because of me, through my coming to you again. So again, we talked about this when we looked at that verse. Boast doesn't mean to brag about so much or be kind of conceited, but it has to do with like an expression of full confidence. And so that your confidence or your boast. So in chapter 1, he's saying your boast, your confidence, Messiah will be strengthened be abounding in my coming back to you again. And here he's saying something like, you living out the mind of Messiah also gives me the confidence that I didn't labor in vain or in emptiness. Right? There's a mutuality that's expressed here. This you affect me and I affect you. Like we may be separated. I may be in a prison in Rome. You may be suffering in Philippi. But we are united, and there's a relationship here. And so when we rolling from verse 16 into verse 17, he says, I want to have confidence in the day of Messiah that I didn't run or labor in vain, but rather, so verse 17 begins with this Allah, which means, but rather, kind of continuing thought, I didn't run or labor in vain, but rather, since I am being poured out as a drink offering upon, or the word that's translated upon, epi can have to do with concerning or in relation to the sacrifice and the service of your faith. I rejoice and share my joy with you all. So literally he says, but rather, since I'm indeed being poured out like a drink offering in relation to, in connection with the sacrifice and the service of your faith, I rejoice. And the metaphor, it's obvious to those of us who are familiar with the Hebrew Scriptures. It's connected with the sacrificial system, and so you have kind of in the picture you have the burnt offering, the sacrifice, the thesia in Greek here. You have the service itself, the liturgia, like where we get the word liturgy, the service itself, the ministry itself, and then you have the drink offering. The Greek word is spendo, so that's easy to kind of remember when I'm spendo. In connection, the drink offering was really in connection with the sacrifice, with the burnt offering. So it wasn't as though the drink offering were necessarily poured out upon the burnt offering, but it was poured out in relation, like at the same time or with the burnt offering. We look in Numbers chapter 28, verses 6 and 7, says, "This is the regular burnt offering initiated at Mount Sinai as a pleasing aroma, a fire offering to Adonai. With each lamb, pour out a fourth of a hin of fermented drink at the sanctuary as a drink offering to Adonai." So with each lamb, you also to pour out a fourth of a hin of fermented drink. In Numbers 15, verses 10 through 12, it says, "You are to also offer as the drink offering half a hin of wine as a fire offering, as a pleasing aroma to Adonai. This is to be done for each bull or ram, for each young goat or lamb. Do this for each one, for as many as you prepare." So there's this imagery of, in the worship, the ancient worship of Israel, the sacrificial system, and there would be the primary, the burnt offering, and along with the burnt offering is the drink offering. Now, Paul uses later this language of a drink offering in conjunction with the idea that his death is imminent, right? In 2 Timothy 4:6, he says, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come." But him being poured out as a drink offering doesn't necessarily mean that he's definitely going to die here. For him, remember, he's in chapter 1, he's like, I don't know which one I want. If it were for me, I'd rather die and be with him. But for your sake, I believe that for me to live is to Messiah, to die is gain. That's really where my profit is. That's where what I would want. But for your sake, I believe the Lord. I'm confident the Lord has me here. So he's expressed this confidence that he's going to be returned to them here. So he's not necessarily talking about when he's being poured out. Being poured out doesn't necessarily equate to a martyrdom, to being killed in that regard. It simply points to sacrifice. It points to an act of worship. And that sacrifice can include martyrdom, can include dying for the faith, but it's not limited to that. You see what I'm saying? The being poured out, it is a wide range of sacrificial offering. His ministry, his service, his suffering, and yes, ultimately his very life and death are an offering to the Lord. So, but the totality of what the whole clause here, what we read is that both, look, he and they, it's a metaphor for what both of them are experiencing at the hand of the Roman Empire. He says, even since I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and the service of your faith. Right? So that's the sacrifice of your faith, the service of your faith. And so the burnt offering it's interesting, the sacrifice, the burnt offering was primary and the drink offering was secondary. So Paul is, even in humility, he's placing himself not as primary but secondary. Right? He's placing himself as the drink offering in conjunction with their sacrifice. That their gift, their sacrifice is the primary matter. And their gift can include, their sacrifice can also be inclusive of whatever it is that they've sent to him with Epaphroditus. Remember, they've sent him an offering, which we find out at the end of the end of the book, or the letter in Philippians 4:18. He uses this kind of language again, this sacrificial language. Again, he says, I have received everything and have more than enough. I am amply supplied, having received from Epaphroditus what you sent, a fragrant aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God. Right? So the totality of their faith, their worship, their sacrifice, he's putting that primary, and his drink offering is happening alongside, in conjunction with it. But together it's a drink, it's a fragrant aroma to the Lord. All of this is fragrant to the Lord. If you go back to I read a portion from Numbers 15, I read a portion from Numbers 28, and if you go back to those passages and you were to read the whole of them, what you see repeatedly concerning the offering, concerning the sacrifice, is this language of a fragrant aroma to the Lord. A fragrant aroma, right? That this is, we have this song that I think has to be one of most people, once they hear it, one of our favorite worship songs. It's a simple song. It's a song I learned as a child it was Salty. It's Salty, P-S-A-L-T-Y, Salty, kids praise. And it's, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul rejoice. That, let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. That this is the heart of worship, that it would be sweet to you. And the same idea with the sacrificial system is that it's a fragrant aroma. That that smells good. That smells good. And he's saying that, so when you're cooking, and you pour you're going to cook with some wine, and you pour the wine, and it hits the heat, the fire hits it, and the fragrant aroma goes up. You walk, it smells good, and then you're going to be cooking. You got the meat cooking and everything. All of this is an imagery of our worship to the Lord. That as it's offered in authenticity, as it's offered in obedience to Him, becomes a fragrant aroma to Him. And when we worship, we've kind of, first of all, we've limited and I know we all know that worship is all encompassing, but the language of worship, we all do it. So I just love worship. We're generally referring to praise and worship, right? We're referring to worship in song. And so we tend to limit, unintentionally, limit our definition of what worship is to song. But within that context, since that's how we generally associate worship, I've found that for many of us, for most of us probably on some level, worship is one of our favorite parts of service, right? It's when we, we even use the language service as to define a service in the service, but of a time of ministry. This is something that we are actually to be doing unto the Lord. It's service unto the Lord. And one of the things that we do is offer up a time of worship in song where we're praising the Lord, right? And there's a reason we do that, because we want to be in his presence, and it says that he inhabits the praises of his people, right? That the Lord dwells upon, he's enthroned upon the praises of his people. So if he's there inhabiting, enthroned upon the praises of his people, I want to be where he is, because in his presence there's fullness of joy. At his right hand there are pleasures evermore, right? That's where I want to be, is with him. And so we'll tend to associate a time of worship with a time that does relate emotionally to us. We do feel during that time. We emotionally connect, and that's all, and then that's fine. Now, the scripture does say, offer your bodies in Romans chapter 12, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. This is your reasonable act of worship. Offer the totality of who you are, not just your song, not just a sacrifice on the altar, but the totality of who you are. And when we worship, right, we're in his presence, and there's joy there. There's joy in worship. And so even in the and joy, we've talked about this before, but joy is not limited to some giddy feeling. It's not defined by circumstances. Joy, there's a settledness to joy even in the midst of circumstances. There's a contentedness, there's a perspective. So that, that's why I love the overflow of praise at the beginning of Ephesians chapter 1. There's this, when you see it in Greek, it's like, I don't remember how many verses, but it's like 12 verses that it's basically, I think 12 verses, like a run-on sentence, overflowing, cascading kind of praise. And the whole imagery there is Paul is praising in this moment, but he's in chains. And yet he's free. And in chains, he's unchained. And he's elevated, in one sense, above the present circumstances with a perspective whose eyes are fixed on Yeshua. That in the midst of the circumstance, in the midst of the suffering, that he can look at all of this as this is a worship service unto the Lord. This is a sacrifice unto the Lord. This is unto you, not from some sort of, look what I've done, but just how I love to be in your presence. And when I'm serving you and when I'm offering my totality of who I am as a sacrifice to you, when in the midst of this circumstance I can reply as Yeshua did, when we have the mind of Messiah, and he emptied himself, right, obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross, and therefore so God has exalted him to the highest place, and that there is a raising up as you worship the Lord and you empty, that then being poured out as a sacrifice. Paul says this is a privilege. It's a privilege of worship. I rejoice in that. He said, since I am being poured out as a drink offering upon or alongside, along with the sacrifice and the service of your faith. This is all happening, like your sacrifice and the service of your faith. I'm being poured out as a drink offering alongside that. I rejoice and share my joy with you all. I see the Lord at work in this. I didn't run in vain, he says. That's unthinkable. I didn't run in vain. This present suffering is, and what I'm going through, what you're going through, to see in the midst of the suffering that it not result in conflict between you, but to see you standing as one, to stand and walking in the mind of Messiah and putting one another first. Boy, that brings confidence that none of this was in vain, because I see the fruit of Messiah of you, and I'm confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it in the day of Messiah. There is a joy that comes with seeing that God is at work in the midst of the difficulty. And it's the same kind of attitude that he expressed in chapter 1, right? When he goes, look, hey, some people are preaching the gospel, out of good motives, and others are doing it out of selfishness. They're trying to stir up trouble for me. He goes, but what then? What does it matter? What then? What matters is this. I'm not going to focus on what I can't control. What matters is this: the Messiah is being proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. I see what he's doing being accomplished. My eyes are fixed on him. And so I'm elevated above the circumstances. My heart is fixed on him. So that all of this is an act of worship. This is the joy of worship. This is joy in worship. Not just rejoicing when I'm worshiping in song and having a feeling, but joy in knowing that when I'm being poured out and this is a fragrant offering unto the Lord, that this is delightful to the Lord. Oh, I rejoice in that. And when I see you doing that, I rejoice in that. It's not rooted in circumstances. It's rooted in my eyes are fixed on you, Lord. It's the perspective of one who keeps their focus fixed on the Lord. In Habakkuk 3:17, Paul knew the scriptures. He was rooted in the scriptures. And so you have this, one of my favorite passages at the final verses of Habakkuk. In the midst of there's difficulty that's on the way, but Habakkuk's focus is on the Lord. He says, though the fig tree doesn't blossom and there's no yield on the vines, though the olive crop fail and the fields produce no food, the flock is cut off from the fold and there's no cattle in the stalls. What he's described here is complete disaster, right? It's complete economic collapse. There's nothing. It's all gone. Yet, verse 18, I will triumph in Adonai. I will rejoice in the God who is my salvation, the God who rescues me, the God who, my joy is in him. Even in spite of all of this, my focus is on him, elevated above that. Adonai, my Lord, is my strength. He has made my feet like a deer's, and he will make me walk on my high places. So here, Paul is, he may be in a, home imprisonment, but it's not like he's in the Hilton in Rome. It's not like he's got a room with a view. He's in an uncomfortable place, chained to soldiers, and yet his perspective is, and I'm being poured out, I'm suffering, but I rejoice. I rejoice. And since we're in this thing together, he says, I'm being poured out. There's alongside the sacrifice of your faith. And he, in one sense, he invites them to rejoice by presuming they're already doing so, right? He says, I rejoice and I share my joy. The word share my joy is a single verb, is sun kairo, which is the sun at the beginning is with, and then joy. So I with joy. I share my joy. I'm rejoicing with you all, right? I rejoice, and I'm with joying you all. We're all rejoicing together. There's the presumption that they're also rejoicing, and an invitation to rejoice with him. But yet, just in case they're not currently rejoicing, because maybe there is conflict, maybe they are beginning to let the pressure cause them to put themselves first rather than others first. He's refixed their focus. have the mind of Messiah. And he says, in the same way, you also rejoice and share your joy with me. So up to this point, all of Paul's talking about joy pretty much has been about his rejoicing. When I pray for you, when I think of you all, I rejoice. But here he makes the shift to calling them to rejoice and to share their joy with him. I'm demonstrating my joy to you in the midst of these circumstances, sharing my joy, my perspective with you. Now make my joy complete, right? By being of the same mind, having the same love, united in spirit with one purpose. Right? And he's been focused on the progress, the success of their joy in the faith in Philippians 1:25. He says, convinced of this, I know I will remain and continue with all you all for the sake and of your progress and joy in the faith. Right? So there's you affect me and I affect you. I know that, and we can rejoice in what the Lord is doing in us together. As you work out your salvation in fear and trembling, do everything without grumbling and complaining, but rather continue to grow in your joy and share that with me. Right? He says, the same way you also rejoice and sunkarete, you share your joy with me. Let's share this with one another. You're making a sacrifice, I'm being poured out, and yet together we're rejoicing because this is worship unto the Lord. It's corporate worship. We're rejoicing together as we sacrifice unto the Lord, as we're being poured out, and yet we rejoice. Amen? All right. Well, let me say good morning to everybody. I do want to encourage everyone, if you would, or ask you to pray. Pray in particular. I have my sister, and I have a lot of friends. My whole growing up was in Florida, and there's a really bad hurricane that's heading in that direction. So my sister Maria is more inland. So they're gonna, but they're in the hurricane path, like where you're dealing with the high winds and all of that. If you can pray for Maria and her family, and really just for Florida, I'm concerned because it's heading above Tampa. I should go this way. So it's heading above Tampa, and so the back winds below, it's going to bring a storm surge that they're talking. My niece lives in Tampa. They're talking about, on some level, 9-foot storm surge, which is a devastating storm surge to the Tampa Bay area. So anyway, if you could pray for the people of Florida, that would be great, and for my sister in particular, but for all of them. Good morning to Joshua. Good morning to Jeannie and to Eileen. And good morning to Ron and Amy. And good afternoon to Kathleen. And let's see here. Yeah, some areas that we love a lot, like Tarpon Springs, which is this Greek area. It's right in the heart of what's going to be hit. So I'm personally concerned I'm concerned in a way that hits personally, sometimes there are disasters around the world that we're all concerned about when we see them happening, but then when we know people in the midst of it, it obviously brings it to a more pointed focus. Good morning to Kelly and Melody Woods, and to Kelly Kenfield, and to Jerry and Janet and Dayspring and Rachel, and to Elizabeth and Jesse, and to the Eddies, to Lauren and Mike and David and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett, and to Pastor and Sister Martinez and Pat and Lori and Sonia and Margarita and Sonia Takach, and to Tina. And let's see here. Good morning to Barbara Callahan. And let me pull this over. And to Jason and Jackie. Good morning, Jackie. And let's see. Sorry. I think and Sharon. Good morning to Sharon as well. And to Joyce and Joe. All right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.
We're choosing celebration, breaking into freedom. You're the song of our hearts. We cast aside our shadows, trust you with our sorrows. You're the song of our hearts. Dancing to the rhythm of your heart. We're rising from the ashes to the stars. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love. Define us, joy will reignite us. You're the song of our hearts. Come on, my soul. The dark is just a canvas for your grace and brightness. You're the song of our hearts. We're dancing to the rhythm of your heart. Oh, oh, oh. We're rising from the ashes to the stars. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love. You're the joy, the song of my heart, the hope of my soul. Hey! In the shadows, in the sorrows, in the desert, when the pain hits, you are constant, ever present. You're the song of my heart. Oh, in the shadows, in the sorrows, in the desert, when the pain hits, you are constant, ever present. You're the song of my heart. You're the joy, 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 light in my soul. The joy, 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 making me whole. Though I'm broken, I am running into your arms of love, into your arms.